Chapter 1. The city was completely empty, and contrary to what either one of them would have expected a mere 24 hours ago, the fact that it was empty made them furious. "I'm not going to be a royal sage!" Vivi cried, his eye stalks drooping as they carefully made their way through the completely and obviously abandoned city. "This is such complete bullshit!" Ben didn't quite shout, but he wasn't keeping his voice down either. "You told me they were insane! You told me they wouldn't leave no matter what! How was I supposed to know?" Vivi said, moaning quietly. "Damn it," Ben said, also lowering his voice. "Now I feel extra stupid about those fucking chests." Something about this empty city, and empty cities in general, gave him, and most people, the creeps. His nope sense sat at a comfortable keep an eye out, but his skin was still crawling from the eerie silence. "It was supposed to be easy," Vivi softly wailed. Sniff. "We were supposed to be able to just walk in and start building," sniff, "building lanes of traffic!" His voice was getting higher and progressively more hysterical as he went on. "And stop signs! And a water distribution system!" Let's be real, Viv. All we needed was a guy with a stop-slow paddle just standing in their main area and directing traffic. Could have solved half of their problems in a day, and by the end of the month, we could have had a city crystal all to ourselves. Fuck! Ben whispered, then kicked the surprisingly solid canopy of the over-cavern forest. "Not even any roads, not really," Ben whispered, looking around with a more critical eye. "Viv, look around and tell me what you see." "An overgrown fairy village, stacked on top of an even more overgrown fairy village. A reason to practice casting Blasé's puzzle shield. A distinct lack of fairies." Vivi wasn't so much listing things off as he was making statement after statement, his expression and body language listless and distant. "Say, would you still be willing to offer me the royal wizard position?" "No way, you blew the interview," Ben said quickly, his voice lacking any sort of focus or attention. "Look over there," Ben said, pointing to a cluster of buildings built like a warehouse with an open rectangle where an earthling would put a garage door. "Ugh," Vivi said, his body rippling in disgust. "Filthy. I believe that is the communal waste area. What are those bags?" Vivi was referring to a pile of leather bags, which required some explaining to properly understand. Imagine a rectangle of brown leather, and off of the corners of the long ends were very long hoops or straps. The hoops, if strapped on the shoulders of a flying creature, would lift up, and the leather rectangle would become a bag and carry whatever was on top of it. It looked a bit like what a fictional stork would carry a fictional baby in, if a nervous and abnormally prudish parent was confronted with the "where do babies come from" question and had to come up with an answer on the fly. In this case, it wasn't a baby being delivered. It was fairy shit. "Wow," Ben said, a deep frown on his face. Vivi was laughing nervously, and Ben's mind noted crude wheelbarrows and badly made shovels, likely for loading the bags. "Is this normal for a fairy village?" "No," Vivi said, pointing with an eye stalk. "Fairies just go wherever they like, usually a bush. In a regular-sized village, this would never be a problem." Vivi paused and looked around, his sphere eyeballs rotating 360 degrees freely atop his eye stalks. "I guess with this many fairies, there would be a problem." "No, sorry," Ben said. "I should have clarified. I meant the wheelbarrows and shovels. Do fairies typically engage in manual labor like that?" No," Vivi said, then gave Ben a knowing look. "Fairies don't work if they can play, and they can always play. They leave all that to the village chief. He handles everything." Ben said, then continued searching around for more details. The remains of a smithy, with more flight bags nearby, holding what Vivi referred to as very poor iron ore. Directly next to the smithy was an open-air workshop with various little crystals sitting on tables, mostly quartz. He noted the attempts that had been made at cutting and polishing them. Ben didn't need Vivi to tell him the cuts were bad. There was a tailor's workshop, and Ben saw a display of well-made fairy clothing. It was a green tunic and pants, along with a green hat. It was all made out of a suede-type leather. He walked over to it and felt the fabric. It was soft and pliable. Good. Examining the clothing, Ben realized that it was the same outfit over and over again, standardized between the sexes. It seemed to be the only outfit they'd figured out how to make well. Fairies typically make clothing out of leaves and flower petals, Vivi said, observing the outfits, then moving on. Those look comfortable. They do, Ben said, then moved on and adjusted his crown, feeling his class whispering something he couldn't quite hear. It was affecting his mind. He just wasn't sure how yet. It didn't feel sinister, it felt... Ben shook his head and started walking away from the tailor's shop a little bit faster. The tannery, where they worked the leather, was next to the tailor. Inside it, Ben saw the enormous hide of something the fairies had taken down. It must have been the size of a wild boar, an enormous foe for the extremely tiny. He was pretty sure it wasn't a boar because the hide was bright green. Now he knew what the fairy outfit was made from. "What did they kill?" Ben asked. "Likely a wood pig," Vivi said. "That looks like wood pig to me." "Is that a pig that lives in the woods?" "No. It's a green pig that eats wood as its primary food source. They're quite the pest if they get loose, but the woodmen keep them penned up. There are wild packs of them, of course." Ben gave Vivi a level look. "The woodmen are humanoids, and their primary food source is wood as well. There are no finer lumberjacks around." "Are they green and made of wood? Also, are the wood pigs made of wood as well?" "The short answers are yes and yes. They're quite dexterous and very tough. Impossible to burn, they're too wet." Ben said, then continued his tour, seeing more of the same, until he was standing in front of the communal toilet once again. "Is there a reason?" Vivi asked, squinting and looking away from the disgusting sight. It all seemed to make him terribly uncomfortable. Ben didn't answer. He just stared at the flight bags and imagined what it would be like to do that job. He didn't have to imagine very hard. He'd been a janitor for like a year in a library in a city infested with the homeless. He knew his way around shit. He'd been a laborer, too, and he was no stranger to what he was looking at. Ben shook his head, a very small motion, and gently blasted some air from his nose. There was no way it didn't stink, and every time the guy holding it looked down, he'd see it. It was a wet and heavy load, too, making for a hard, exhausting flight. Ben's shoulders winced in sympathetic pain, imagining the straps digging into him. By the end of a shift of that, there wasn't a chance the guy wouldn't be dirty. Day in and day out for at least a decade. 10 years of that shit. They wanted this so bad. They wanted this so bad. When Ben spoke aloud, the Prince class spoke in his mind, as though they had come to the realization at the same time. Vivi didn't say anything, but his eyes lowered, then widened as he saw what Ben was seeing, and squinted a bit in shame. "They believed in this so much," Ben said, looking at the obvious, dogged struggle it was to survive out here in such great numbers. "Why? I would have quit after 3 months of this, but they just kept going and going. Were they insane? Did they just not notice? What could possibly be worth the struggle? They had to know they were failing. They had to know," Ben said, his face troubled. "Sit and think," his class suggested, and Ben sat. He felt more guidance and began to activate his skills. Secret sense emotion. He even activated annex. Not to claim the area, but to feel it. Nobody remained who had a claim on this place, on this tree. Nobody but him. Between his skills, his class, and his desire to know, something revealed itself to him. He felt it flicker on the edge of his perception, the answer. The dream. Ben reached out and touched it, and he beheld the city. For a long moment he saw it and understood. Saw that it was possible. That it was something inside of them, a dream inside of everyone. Ben reached out further and saw deeper into the dream than even the dreamer, and saw just a glimpse of what lay beyond even the city. Ben glimpsed the kingdom. High above them, unnoticed because Ben had yet to gain the skill look up every once in a while, a true elf fairy gently stood atop a high building watching the intruders. When they'd first walked into Strange Town, he thought they might be looking to immigrate, a thought which sent a fresh wave of grief through him because of course fairies would still be seeking this place out. What was he going to do about that? What would he tell them? Then he'd heard them speaking. First, he wanted to laugh. Then he was shocked. After that, he grew angry, and after that, very angry. He'd never, in fact, been more angry in his entire life. The way they talked, the casual way they walked, the smug certainty that they could have done it all better. Any other day, it would have merely made him mad. Today, so close to the day it had all fallen apart, while he was so fresh in his mourning, he would not stand for it. Instead, he watched with a stony expression as they toured the corpse of his city, like maggots crawling, looking for a good place to eat their way in. He waited patiently for them to begin looting, intending to wait till they were completely overburdened before he struck. Nothing had been stolen. Ghost Ears would have allowed for the one with the crown to take an outfit from the store, but he didn't seem interested in putting anything on. Ghost Ears had frowned at that, some part of his brain realizing the man was completely naked but unable to form an opinion about it. All he could notice, really, was that the man wore a badly made crown very well. Some skill, he thought, and a very strange one. They'd gone back to the community toilet, and the man had stared at it for a while before the most unlikely thing happened. The man sat down, reached out, and touched the dream. Even more unlikely than that, he was moved by it. Possibly even more than Ghost Ears had been when he'd originally dreamed it. "Vivi," the man said. And Ghost Ears turned his head, directing the holes his ears had once covered towards the strangers, not wanting to miss a word. "We're leaving." "Where are we going, Ben?" That was the man's name, Ben. "We're going to scout. We're looking for a river. That's the most important thing. Preferably a river close to a mountain, somewhere with good soil. Somewhere naturally protected by hard terrain, but easy to travel around inside the borders. Somewhere we can get everything we need, and positioned well enough to trade for what we can't get, and what's important for valuable land? What haven't I named yet?" "High mana density?" Vivi said, putting forth real effort to follow along Ben's line of thought. "Yes, high mana density. A dungeon, possibly?" "Why?" "Because, Viv, we're leaving this place. We're going to find some good land, and we're going to make this work. We're going to build that city, you and me, and whoever else we can find. I swear it by my crown and by my title as a prince, we are going to build this city. There's an entire people out here, hard-working people willing to carry shit in bags for miles to keep the land around them from being polluted. My people, my kingdom, my subjects. We're going to build this dream, Vivi. And you're not going to be a fucking royal wizard. You're going to be the first damn Aeon Slug royal sage in the history of your people!" Ghost Ears felt something like a wave of heat pass over everything. The man's crown was shimmering, as though it were metal straight out of the furnace. It was something deeper than that, though. Something felt by the being rather than the body. The heat of passion. the fire of his soul. "Fairy shit," Ghost Ears said, shocked at the intensity, uttering a curse he'd invented during his many rotations carrying waste away from the city. "He's got to be an Inferno grade, no? Solar? He couldn't be a Quasar, could he?" Ghost Ears didn't know, but he knew. "Fairy shit," he whispered again. He'd missed what Ben and Vivi had done after that, except to see the Aeon Slug. "Fairy shit, that's an Aeon Slug. How did I miss that?" Ghost Ears shook his head, noting how Vivi seemed to be extremely excited, judging by the way his eyes were thrashing about. The duo started looking for a place to spend the night, and Ghost Ears looked over the wreckage of his city. He looked in the opposite direction the prince and the Aeon Slug had gone, and imagined flying off to be a village chief again. It was hard, even before this, to get excited about. Now, he felt something tugging on his soul, something bright and fiery, something that called him and washed away his mourning. "One more time, then," Ghost Ears said. "Just one more try. What's the harm? If this doesn't work, well, what's a little more failure after all this?" he whispered to himself. Then began to stealthily follow after Ben and Vivi. It was night, and the orderly uniform stars of the world made for a bland and uninteresting sight. Still, Ben stared at them out the open window of the fairy-sized apartment he and Vivi were squatting in. It clearly belonged to a male, and one without a family, because it was utterly Spartan with its lack of furniture and decoration. The stars were arranged equidistant from one another in a cubic grid that extended outward for what Ben assumed was infinity. He stared, then shook his head and looked away. "Your world's got a shitty sky, my dude," he said. Vivi was currently inspecting every slightly dirty surface, and then grimacing away from them before pathologically going to the next dirty surface, and then getting disgusted by that one, too. "I've heard new arrivals often comment on the night sky," Vivi said, inspecting a small stain on a wooden wall with sick fascination. "But I like it. It's honest." "Honest?" "Out in your universe," the Aeon Slug said, "there are planets and galaxies and all sorts of things just floating around, waiting to be explored and discovered. Here, there isn't." "There isn't?" Ben asked, raising an eyebrow. "No." Vivi turned away from the stain and slugged his way over to Ben, joining him by the window. "All those eons ago, when the system came along, he condensed our plane of existence down to the world. There used to be a universe out there, sure, but those aren't stars, Ben. They're some sort of constructs that gather and direct all the power of the plane of wild magic and concentrates it here in the world, where it's consumed by the system for, well, whatever it is he does." Ben turned away from Vivi and with new eyes looked out again at the night sky. "That's fucking wild," Ben said quietly. "Wait, that's wild, right?" "It's pretty wild," Vivi confirmed. "Wow," he said, letting the new information wash over his mind and expand it. "Prince Ben," Vivi said, his voice quiet, "I think we need to talk." "Yeah," Ben said, looking away from the sky and finding a semi-uncomfortable-looking wooden chair to plop down in. The chair creaked like it was on the verge of breaking, but held. Some small part of Ben's mind registered that the chair was made of twigs, but that wasn't really important. "You made a royal oath that you were going to build a city. You swore it pretty much every way you can swear an oath." "Well, I meant it," Ben said, leaning back in his creaky, dangerously unstable chair. "I don't know exactly how yet or when, but I'm going to do it. Why not?" "Because it will be very difficult," Vivi said, "and it's going to require more than the two of us. And you're an extremely tiny, very low-leveled prince with no property, no wealth, and a single follower." Frankie portaled in at that last comment, landing right in front of Vivi. He glared at the Aeon slug with his faceless front, and then Vivi hastily corrected himself. 2 followers. Frankie nodded at him, then portaled back into the utility pocket. Yeah, Ben said. Those are all problems, all right, but they're solvable problems. What else is stopping us? Well, Vivi said, happy to complain in a constructive and useful way. The reason we're doomed to failure, Vivi said, sounding excited, is that to build the kind of city you said you will, we'll need to find the perfect location. Unfortunately, perfect locations like that tend to already be inhabited by monsters. By very, very powerful monsters. The hard reality is, outside of the very, very small pockets of civilization that have been carved out over eons, the world is uninhabitable. It is so unbelievably dangerous out here. So it'd take a miracle or a powerful wish for us to find good land we could settle and fortify before the monsters started attacking. Ben said. Yeah, that's a big problem. Can't really do anything about that right now. Anything more immediate? Something we can work on right now? We need to get out of the Overcavern Forest, Vivi said seriously, before we can do anything. There's no guarantee we'll pull that off. Why's that? Ben asked. So far, this place doesn't seem that bad. Vivi laughed. Then you are one of the most insanely lucky individuals I've ever met. There are monsters, dungeons, lairs. Void forbid we come across a citadel. Very old and established gremlin tribes live out here, far from where adventurers can easily exterminate them. Don't let anyone mislead you. Old gremlins are dangerous. Those are the little brown furred fuckers with the big bulging red eyes and the really long teeth, Ben said, referencing the extended lower canine teeth of gremlins, and Vivi nodded with an eye stalk. Hate those guys. They totally destroyed the last town I was in. Ben trailed off, the memory of Greyport 3 unpleasant enough that he didn't want to talk about it. Our best bet would be to head for Solas, Vivi said. The capital of the Sunlets. It's a big city, and luckily for us, it borders the Overcavern Forest. Solas is the city of opportunity. We'll be able to find our fortune there. Okay, I like this, Ben said, standing up and starting to pace around. This sounds like a plan. Get out of the Overcavern Forest and go to Solas. Okay, Ben said, starting to smile. This is something we can do right away. Let's get some sleep then and start that tomorrow. In response, Vivi yawned, nodded his eye stalks, and then slugged his way over to the cleanest corner of the apartment. He curled up like a dog, and Ben thought he was asleep until he spoke one last time. I'm mad we didn't get to take over Strangetown, he said. But I'm still glad I left the dungeon. Good night, Ben. I'm mad too, Ben said. And I'm glad to have you. Good night, Vivi. Ben laid down on the hardwood floor and stared up at the ceiling for what felt like a long time before sleep finally claimed him. And outside, ghost ears clung to the side of the building, thinking about what they had said. Under the canopy of the Overcavern Forest, a great white shadow stalked through the forest. A master of stealthy movement, like a shark in the ocean. But he was not in the ocean anymore. He'd still call himself a shark, though, and he'd tell anyone who asked, and anyone who didn't ask either, that he was a shark. Short Bus was proud of who he was, and right now, he was proud of how powerful his nose was. The hunter follows his nose, a gigantic predator unrivaled by anything the land has ever seen, Short Bus said in what he thought was a whisper. Unfortunately, he was half deaf by human standards, so it was more of a stage whisper than anything else. His sense of smell memory is eidetic, perfect, practically a hallucination in its vividness. Right now, he said, raising up an arm and touching his enormous shark nose, patting it fondly. It's telling him his little buddy is close, very close, right here, but he's not here, Short Bus said, looking around, turning his head carefully and taking in the details of the forest. He'd slept recently, and his skill, common knowledge, which came with his plus perk, the bright spark, had filled in a great deal of the blanks. He didn't know how much, but he got a sense about things. Rather than being a confusing mess, the forest around him had opened up to him a bit, revealing information that previously would have been hidden. He put a hand on the soft green glowing tree next to him and patted it, thinking. He knew the tree was radiating mana, and that sleeping near it would strengthen his body. "He's right here, or very close by." "No," Short Bus said, turning his head and shutting his eyes. "Ha! You can't hide from me. I can see you with my nose," he said, then started silently moving through the forest again. Silent, except for his loud, external monologue. Chapter 2. Greyport 3 was destroyed, completely wiped out by the attack of a violet dungeon core created by the apocalypse. All of its defenders, every living creature, dead and absorbed by the roaming dungeon. It wasn't, however, just the defenders who had been killed, but the attackers as well. Gremlins, a whole army of them, had been called and given power by the destruction of the town crystal. Most of the old tribe's army, to be exact. Now, the thing to understand about gremlins was that they could, and did, in theory, work with one another. They were perfectly capable of forming tribes and alliances between tribes, but such allies were more in the vein of keep your enemies closer than kumbaya. The old tribe was led by the eldest gremlin, so named because he was the oldest gremlin in the Overcavern Forest by far. Gremlins were blessed with the very common gift of immortality, which was a cheap commodity in the world. Not that it did them or anyone else much good, but there you go. So it was that the eldest gremlin remembered the last time humans had been in the world, because he'd been there. He'd seen it all already. The vast oceans of time meant nothing to him. His mind was that of a very powerful, very incomprehensible being from the beyond, from one of the bad parts. He remembered what humans were like, and more importantly, he remembered the sorts of strange and wonderful things humans brought with them. The animals, the plants, the fungi. The eldest gremlin took a deep breath in through his nose and exhaled it with a shudder of excitement. He snapped his fingers, and several of his useless, ignorant, evil children rushed to do his bidding. They would gleefully die for his amusement. And sometimes he busied himself with the admittedly enjoyable act of reproduction just to make them. That wasn't important right now. The eldest gremlin, without speaking, had his easily produced and highly replaceable children gather him some paper and writing utensils. He spent 10 very fast minutes producing drawings of several kinds of mushrooms and plants, along with notes on each of them to aid in identification, as well as the environments the human plants liked to grow in. He sent them out completely confident they would find what he asked them to. If they didn't, then he would dispose of them and send another batch out to complete the task. He gathered several of his more useful children and sent them to fetch the other elder gremlins of the Overcavern Forest. They ran as fast as they could towards their goal, and the eldest gremlin shook his head. He had gremlins build him a great fire and placed a black cauldron over it. Then, without ceremony, remorse, or hesitation, he set up a quick and dirty altar for a soul gem extraction ritual and began sacrificing his children. They were restrained by their brothers and sisters, screaming as they died, and their bodies transformed into small blue rocks with the consistency and appearance of a bar of soap. Useless. Dim souls, but they would have to do. He gathered up a bag of lives, of souls of his dead offspring, and tossed it into the cauldron, watching carefully as the gems melted into a goo that refused to boil. The eldest gremlin looked at the pitiful amount of liquid, then at the enormous size of the cauldron, and sighed. The summoner's brew which only he knew the secret of making required so many souls to make properly. At least souls of the quality he had access to. A few radiant souls, now that would be interesting. A quasar? Please. Where would he get one of those? He sent off a second set of messengers who carried a new message. Bring sacrifices. As many as you can. Chapter 3. Ben and Vivi had awoken in Strange Town to find it still, sadly, completely abandoned and useless to them. Ben considered absolutely pillaging the place, rampaging through the streets, stealing everything of value, and smashing some windows in the process. But he didn't. Some instinct, some prompting from the ring of sacrifice that protected him from making truly disastrous decisions helped guide him away from a thievery rampage. The most they took were some basic supplies, food and water. Then, they left. They were headed in the direction of Solas, and at Vivi's insistence, they kept to the treetops. The ground-like canopy provided them an easy and safe way to travel, as long as they avoided treetop canopy mimics, which, thanks to Vivi's detailed descriptions, Ben had already spotted 12 of, and had calmly guided them around. Ghost Ears trailed far behind them, unnoticed, still unsure if he was really going to approach them or break off and go back to Strange Town to sob. Both options had their own unique sense of appeal. "Ben, I think something is following us," Vivi said abruptly, keeping easy pace with Ben's fast flight. He slid across the tops of the trees like he was levitating, even matching Ben when he used a flight ring to accelerate. "What's that?" Ben asked, yawning and feeling like stopping to take a piss. "It's just a feeling, but I'm usually right." "Well, I don't have that feeling. Hang on and slow down. I need to take a leak," Ben said, then flew off to the distance and took care of his business. It was so easy without pants. "Better," Ben said when he returned. "So what do you want to do about it?" "How about, I don't know, be at the ready?" Vivi said, shaking in outrage a bit as he spoke. "Shouldn't that be obvious, Your Highness? You do realize the Overcavan Forest is infested with monsters, right? It is extremely dangerous?" Ben rolled his eyes, and the broken antique sword appeared in his left hand in a black flash, his utility pocket equipping it in less than a moment. He began to channel a huge amount of mana into the sword, activating his Royal Antique Restoration left hand. The other half of the broken blade appeared in a contained black burst. It flew towards the hilt as though magnetized, clicking into place and holding firm. Little black flashes appeared near the crack, and metal fragments, pieces of the puzzle, went to their places in the same way. Soon Ben was holding up. It wasn't new, or durable, or pretty, or particularly sharp, but it was solid and whole. It was a short sword, and Ben had short sword proficiency, apprentice, so it was better than nothing. Ben frowned, suddenly unable to pump any more mana into the sword to repair it. "What happened? Why'd my skill turn off?" "It's on cooldown, Ben," Vivi said. "You didn't think you could use active skills indefinitely, did you?" "I've never really come up on the limit," Ben said, then eyed the sword with a measure of distaste. He shrugged. If it came to a fight, it came to a fight, and he'd figure it out. The utility pocket appeared in front of Ben, and Frankie poked his head out, looking fierce. He jabbed a spear out of his body and retracted it as if to say, "I'm ready to fight." "Oh, Frankie," Ben said, reaching out to scratch the utility pocket elemental. "What would I—" Ben heard something in the forest underneath him, beneath the canopy. Frankie retreated back into the utility pocket, ready to strike wherever it would hurt the enemy the most. "Do you hear that?" Ben asked, and Vivi looked a little pale. For some reason, Ben was reminded of how an octopus looked when it changed color to camouflage itself. "It's right under us," Vivi whispered.
Be quiet. The impossible creature, dripping from the leaves. The moment has arrived. The hunt reaches its climax.
Ben could only make out fragments of whatever insane babble was going on under him, but it made him nervous. The voice. Out of nowhere, a frustratingly handsome fairy, with long blonde hair and no ears, flew up to them, holding 2 silver swords, a serious expression on his face.
I'm on your side, he said, looking down. There is a terrible monster here, and we will not be able to outrun it. It is fast. Our odds are slim, and I wish we had more time to speak. Are you prepared to die?
The stranger, who Ben didn't know was Ghost Ears, asked. No, Ben said, looking between Vivi and the new fairy and suddenly feeling like he should be doing something other than feel awkward. For some reason, he just couldn't get worried. And that worried him more than anything. Wait, Ben said, frowning, listening in as he heard the sound of something somewhere below them crashing noisily into a tree and starting to climb it. The canopy far in front of them shook, indicating where the monster would appear.
Dun, dun.
Wait, Ben said, his heart suddenly beating fast, his eyes wide. Ghost Ears knew this was a worst-case scenario. The crashing reached a crescendo, and something huge and gray snapped its way through the thick foliage. An enormous fin appeared. What followed was something out of a nightmare. A shark's face, but flexible, with expression and intelligence. The eyes were black, but if one looked carefully, they could see an iris as well as a pupil. A huge fin rose from its back, somewhere along the spine of the neck. Yes, this was clearly a shark, but a shark somehow transformed into a humanoid shape with arms and legs. The monster was thick, enormous with muscle, and its skin looked tough, very tough. The worst part was the smile and the rows and rows of razor-sharp teeth. Its mouth hung slightly open, giving Ghost Ears a good view of a space big enough to fit all 3 of them with room for 6 more.
I found you, the monster said,
rising further while Ben's party was paralyzed in shock and fear. The monster had thick shoulders with powerful arms. The monster continued to rise, and gray hands were soon pushing against the top of the canopy.
Attack!
Ghost Ears shouted. Vivi was roused from his stupor, letting loose a high-pitched scream as bright green arrows of magic began to form around him. So great was his battle frenzy, his eyes were flailing about and practically striking his body. The most impressive part to Ben was that even with all the movement, somehow it was obvious the eyes attached to the stalks were perfectly tracking the monster, keeping it in view. Ghost Ears was momentarily distracted by Vivi, but once he got his bearings back, he took a step to charge, ready to cut the beast's eyes. But in their moments of hesitation, Ben was already walking forward calmly, and the monster wasn't attacking, just watching, with an insane expression on its face. Ben got close enough for the thing to smash him with its hands. It did not. Instead, it took a deep breath in through its nose, as though savoring something.
Short Boss, Ben whispered. You're alive.
Ghost Ears and Vivi halted their charge.
Ben!
The shark monster said, its voice an extremely loud whisper.
I found you! I thought you were dead.
Man, I thought you were dead. What the hell happened to you? Oh, God! Ben said, suddenly overcome by emotion and running over to his friend, looking for a place to hug. Short Bus lowered a hand, and Ben ended up hugging a couple of his fingers. Dude, you're fucking alive! And you've got phalanges! How?
I thought I was going to die, Short Bus said quietly. I should have, but there was a path, a trail of sparkling light that showed me the way through the wave.
Dude! You're like a dude now, Ben said, smiling hard.
I know, it's horrible, Short Bus said with a sigh. I could have been something, you know. Something great. I chose the evolution that would let me survive, not the one that would let me live.
Man, I thought I was going to be alone out here, Ben said, laughing with sheer relief. I almost died out there. I had to fight for my life. You found me. How did you find me? Ben finally asked.
I tracked you by the scent of your fear pee, Ben.
What?
Ben said, suddenly looking up. You are reliable. You always pee when you get scared, and I was able to find you like that. It's a very smart strategy. You really know how to think ahead. I'm going to start copying you so everyone can find me, too.
No, seriously, don't do that.
I've already been doing it every fight. My scent trail is unmistakable, Ben.
Ghost Ears stood there, sword in hand, breathing hard, heart pounding, waiting for any indication that the fight was about to start. Vivi started laughing. His laughter grew in intensity, and the magic arrows vanished, winking out one by one. He kept trying to say something, but then he would just start laughing again. You! Vivi was forcing it out. You piss yourself every fight! Once he'd said it, Ben realized two things. That he really had pissed himself at the start of every major fight he'd had, and that Vivi was never going to let him live this down. Ben sighed, trying to ignore Vivi. Short Bus did not ignore Vivi. Short Bus turned his enormous head to look at Vivi with his near-totally black eyes. Vivi stopped laughing. Silence reigned between them, and Short Bus's eyes got wider and wider. His eyebrows rose. Though there was no hair on them, they were obvious. He looked critically at Vivi, then critically at Ben. The smile vanished.
Oh, no,
Short Bus said. He began to lean away from Vivi and looked down at Ben in abject horror.
Ben, who is that?
That's Vivi? Ben answered, his tone of voice a question.
Vivi, Short Bus said. My worst fears are confirmed. That's a girl's name. The way she jumped to your defense but humiliated you the moment the danger was past.
Short Bus sucked in some air through his razor-sharp teeth.
Ben, I respect you and your choices, but that is the ugliest female I've ever seen. I'm sorry, I have to say it. You can do better, and I'm ashamed I wasn't here to steer you towards the right course.
Ben put his face in his hands and said, "Oh my God." Vivi choked and said, "Girl?" The Aeon Slug, one of the most dignified and honored creatures of the world, a member of the 3 signatory races, raced over and immediately began arguing with the naked man-shark and very naked human fairy. Ghost Ear stood with his swords out, which suddenly felt a little heavy, looking from human to slug to shark, then repeated the cycle. With a sudden spark of dread, he realized what he was seeing was completely familiar to him. It was the same thing he'd seen day in and day out as a village chief. The only difference was he wasn't sure he could just beat the 3 of them up to get them to stop bickering.
"They're worse than regular fairies," he said under his breath. "Ben, I need you to play along," the giant man-shark said. "I'm helping establish your position of dominance in the hierarchy. The slug is surly, but we can trick him because he looks easy to trick, like an orca. We need to make him think we think he is your girlfriend, Ben. That will keep him in line."
"I can hear you,"
Vivi yelled. Ben and Short Bus ignored him.
"Hey, babe, the adults are trying to talk over here," Ben said casually, and Vivi began to burble in an angry, sluggy way.
"By the forest, I've finally done it. I finally found a worse job than being a village chief."
Then he sheathed his swords, steeled his resolve, took a second to bask in the glory of the dream, and walked over to the 3 to introduce himself. Chapter 4. Deep in the Overcavern forest, a cabal of gremlins painted their fur with white chalk, creating dramatic lines on their bodies, giving them a religious air. They covered their red eyes with blindfolds and stood in a group of 5, each of them holding a wand made of gremlin bone, freshly harvested. As one, they reached into pouches at their sides and pulled out a handful of mushrooms. Many would recognize the little brown, almost purple caps. The mushrooms were pulped and mixed with a brown, thick sludge that had been cooking in a cauldron and ladled out into simple wooden bowls. They ate and began walking in a slow, deliberate circle around a dull, dim soul stone. It looked like a hunk of blue soap, giving off only a faint light. They'd killed 5 young gremlins to produce it, 5 gremlins who didn't remember. They walked, and another monster began softly playing a rhythmic drum. The gremlins began chanting, slowly, singing a brutal and primitive song. A song remembered from a place far, far away. No physical wind rose, yet. Should someone be standing there watching from a distance, they would have felt a chill on their skin. It could be felt in the soul. It could be seen with the eyes and touched by the mind. They were calling into the beyond, and something was calling back. The gremlins were absolutely tripping balls. Seeing shit both real and imagined, yet their minds were focused, as sharp as their unnatural aim. They shared a collective hallucination, just a figment of their imagination, just something they decided could exist. Something which was not impossible or inevitable, a mere possibility. Their chanting was not ugly. That was really the most frightening part. The gremlins could sing, and their voices were powerful, for all that their words were ugly and their language was harsh. The space around the soul stone began to warp, and a shadow darkened the air. Mana and something deeper grew heavy, thick, condensing onto the collective mental image. The gremlins began walking faster. Each of them lit a small flame in their left hands and held it away from their body, away from the soul stone. 5 long and black shadows were cast, intersecting and behaving in ways no shadow ever should. The shadows collided like physical things and lifted off the ground, coiling and snaking upwards like serpents up the trunk of a sapling. The gremlins continued walking, weaving their shadows together until it was done. Rooted into the ground was a strange, insubstantial pod, inside of which a new monster could be seen growing. A bit like a magical, artificial womb. It was clearly female, and nubs like antlers could be seen growing from her forehead. The gremlins collapsed, panting, enormous smiles on their faces as they came down from their mushroom trip. They had no idea what they'd just called from the beyond, nor did they care. A messenger had arrived from the old tribe, carrying with him a large flask of summoner's brew and instructions on its use. Similar scenes were already playing out in many gremlin villages that very night everywhere. The system had finally done it. It had finally fucked up and given them a way to pull new beings into the world. They would be slightly disappointed later to find that the beings called in still obeyed the same rules they did, then overjoyed when they realized how powerful some of these monsters were. But the woman with the antlers was no monster. And when she would eventually emerge from her pod of shadows, the gremlins would remember an important lesson. Not everything in the beyond wanted to come over. And woe to the summoner who had to tell such a creature they could never go back. Woe to them indeed.
Chapter 5. Say, do any of you happen to have any food? Ghost Ears had asked. If he'd known that his simple, idle desire for food would set into motion a cascade of events that would echo through multiple realities, time, and exotic realms of pure possibility, that it would shake reality in a hard and fast way, he probably would have waited like an hour or so, when his question would have just resulted in getting fed and little else. But the inevitable future could not be denied, and the shadow of the beyond loomed dark and heavy over the timeline, like the dark of the valley of death in which we are called to fear no evil. Anyways, the answer about anyone having any food had obviously been a hard no, except for a bunch of really gross raw fish that Ben kept insisting on calling sushi. Nobody else called it sushi, or even food, so they'd had to figure something else out. It had been a brief discussion containing common phrases such as, "Well, what sounds good to you?" and "It doesn't matter to me, let's just eat whatever," as well as, "I'm a magical vegetarian, I can only eat magical plants," plus a healthy dash of, "Ben, I can definitely eat plants," followed immediately by a, "Short Bus, your teeth suggest to me that you definitely can't eat plants." There was then a brief argument between Ben and Short Bus about what the man-shark could and could not eat without getting sick, an argument that ended when Short Bus declared sharks to be natural vegans. At that point, Ben had just stopped trying, Vivi had started complaining about being hungry as well, and Ghost Ears started getting hangry. "Well, we can't just stand here talking about it," Ghost Ears had finally said, heading off more bickering before it could erupt. "Agreed," Ben said. Ben had looked at the fairy, briefly forgetting his name until he saw the missing ears. "Ghost Ears! I'm new around here, so I don't really know how to get food exactly. What's good around here?" Internally, Ben praised the good sense of naming people after their most notable physical feature, then realized it was a system that could not support a population of over 500. "Oh," Ghost Ear said, a gleam in his eye. "I'm sure we can figure out something to hunt down." Which brings us to, well, now. The beanstalk elemental was about 10 feet tall and was growing directly out of the forest floor, as in unable to move from its rooted spot. To Short Bus, it looked like a viney green stick, a foot or two taller than he was, that flailed around in a circle when anyone got too close. To Ben, Vivi, Ghost Ears, and Frankie, it was something out of a fairy tale. Ben fortunately refrained from making a Jack and the Beanstalk reference except to say fee-fi-fo-fum when he was standing near its base and staring up and up and up. The thing was agitated immediately by their presence. Sharp vines snapped in their direction menacingly, cracking the air and protecting the precious few bean pods that hung shielded by leaves and vines near its trunk. "Want me to tackle it and get this over with?" Short Bus asked, digging around an enormous nostril with an equally enormous finger and then flicking a booger away with excessive force. Gross. "I think that would be for the best," Ghost Ears said, staring at Ben, watching him, seeing what he would do. It was a shit test, basically. It was subtle, but Ben had been working with other males long enough to recognize what was going on. Ghost Ears wanted to see if he could just start making decisions for the group, to see if Ben was a coward, to see if Ben was weak. It sounded rude when it was all said out loud in English, but that's just how it was with men. Ben didn't begrudge Ghost Ears for doing it. Ben had done it himself, and he wasn't about to let this earless fucking elf eat his goddamn lunch. Why don't you sit this one out?" Ben said in a completely normal and friendly tone of voice, then turned to Ghost Ears. "This seems like a good opportunity for us to all get to know one another, don't you agree?" Subtle, Ben. Real fucking subtle. "You're sure?" Ghost Ears asked. "It could be dangerous." In response, Ben flared his wings and shot into the air with a flight ring, leaving a puff of dust behind on the ground. "Vivi!" Ben yelled down. "That thing doesn't look like it's got much inside reach. Get inside its guard and distract it." Vivi bobbed his eye stalks, eager to prove himself, and zoomed forward, effortlessly dodging the whipping vines and getting to the base of the plant. Frankie, to Ben's horror, appeared on Vivi's head in between his eye stalks and seemed to be having the time of his life. "Ghost Ears, use those swords and cut those bean pods loose."
"They're fragile,"
Ghost Ears said, flying up to get closer to Ben.
"How are you going to catch them?"
"Ah!" Vivi screamed, defying inertia and momentum as he dodged on a dime, changing direction, zipping forward, and then stopping instantly. His eyes were rotating wildly as he took in the full 360 of his surroundings. "I've got it! Go!" Ben yelled. And Ghost Ears, to his great credit, stopped asking questions and sprung into action. He timed it well, waiting for Vivi to agitate the beanstalk elemental enough that it would attack, and then surging forward with speed that made Ben envious. His swords flashed, and a bean pod almost as large as Ben started falling. Ben flew forward, accelerated by a flight ring. "Whap!" Ben yelled, and the bean pod vanished into his utility pocket. "Again!" Ben yelled, and Ghost Ears grinned. In the background, the scene of the extremely tiny creatures fighting the harmless-looking beanstalk elemental was too much for the very large-sized short bus. He stared at the drama with wide eyes, a huge smile on his face before he started just howling with laughter. He tried to say something, then just pointed with a large finger and kept laughing, doubled over, clutching his stomach. As the fight went on, Short Bus started imitating each of them, yelling, "Whap!" running around and pretending to attack things with a sword, or just running around screaming in terror like Vivi. To be completely fair to Short Bus, he'd been the one to track the beanstalk elemental down in the first place, so he did contribute something to the fight. By the time they were done, not a single bean pod was left, though there weren't that many to begin with. When the last pod was cut loose, the beanstalk elemental shuddered, screamed, and then went limp, going from green to yellow to dust before their eyes in the space of 5 blinks. The mood had changed among the group. Ben slapped Ghost Ears on the shoulder, and Ghost Ears reciprocated the gesture, both of them grinning like idiots. Vivi basked in the praise he received, and so did Frankie. Short Bus relayed the entire fight to them from start to finish as they all excitedly told the story from their perspective. Victory. It's a hell of a drug, and the best kind of bond a group can form around. All that was left was to make camp somewhere and enjoy the fruits of their success. Someone farted loudly and everyone laughed. That night they had eaten. Ben and Ghost Ears were both omnivores. They could eat pretty much everything. Vivi was a magical herbivore, meaning he could only eat magical plants, so the magic peas were perfect. Short Bus insisted he was also an omnivore, despite Ben explaining how unlikely it was. He'd eaten the beans, against everyone's advice. Literally everyone had told him it was a bad idea. He was currently laying on his side and farting and groaning, giving everyone a bad case of "we told him so." Frankie was pretending to eat the beans by swallowing them into his body and then covertly adding them back to the pile inside of Ben's utility pocket when Ben wasn't paying attention. The Short Bus farted again, and it was still funny. Vivi, however, was acting strange. His skin, normally brown, shifted and changed, camouflage forming and making him blend into the environment. He'd notice, then laugh nervously and change back to normal. Short Bus was pacing around the camp, restless. They had camped at the base of a broccoli tree, and the forest outside of their island of light was dark and quiet. Ghost Ears kept looking up and looking around, an odd expression on his face. There was an extremely tiny-sized campfire which they had used to cook the delicious sweet green beans, and Ben was sitting next to it, warming his naked body. For some reason, his skill, the prince has no clothes, seemed to be ineffective at masking his nakedness. His nope sense was starting to crawl. There hadn't been a whole lot of questions asked of Ghost Ears other than his introduction and explanation that he'd been the founder of Strangetown, and that he wished to assist Ben in the establishment of a new city. As of yet, there had been no discussion about what to do about him. Ben had planned to have a short huddle with Short Bus and possibly Vivi to figure out what to do about the earless fairy. "Just lay down on your side," Ben called out to Short Bus, who was restlessly pacing and clutching his stomach. "I can't," the man-shark said, still smiling but clearly uncomfortable. "It makes me nervous to hold still." "Well, you're not going to feel better till you lay down, trust me. I've been through this before," Ben said, and to his surprise, Ghost Ears started nodding.
"It's true. Us fairies have experienced our fair share of discomfort ever since we received omnivore as a racial trait."
Ben looked over at the fairy, who was roasting another bean over the fire with his sword acting as a kebab. It was amusing to note that at their current size, the peas were proportional in size to a small watermelon. It was also interesting to note that the three of them ate a huge amount of food, more than their size would suggest was necessary or even possible. Ghost Ears looked up from his food, and then Ben looked away from him and flew up to Short Bus, landing on a shoulder. "Come on, buddy. Time to step outside of your comfort zone. In this case, I guess you'll be laying outside of your comfort zone." "Ah!" Short Bus winced, his face still in a shark's smile. "That's so funny," he said, his voice forced. Ben flew down to a gigantic hand and lifted it over his head, grabbing a finger and dragging Short Bus over to a nice, quiet area. The gigantic man-shark allowed it to happen and allowed himself to be pulled down. Short Bus was laid out on his side, his long tail flexible enough to shift into a comfortable position. He was on his left side, and his entire body seemed to sag when he finally stopped moving, likely for the first time in his life. "Oh," Short Bus said, his forced smile relaxing, and then he immediately farted again. Nobody laughed this time except for Vivi, but it was such a small laugh that it was forgivable. "Better?" Ben asked.
"Yes," Short Bus said. "Oh, why didn't anyone tell me not to eat those?"
Short Bus asked the party, of which literally every person had told him not to eat the beans. "No idea," Ben said, floated over and patted the shark on the gigantic snout, then flew back over to the fire.
"There's quite a story there, I'm sure,"
Ghost Ears said, when Ben had settled in next to the fire again. "I owe that guy my life like 3 times over," Ben said, pointing at the prone giant with a nod of his head. "He saved my life and never asked for anything. I've known him like less than a week, and I think he's the best friend I've ever had."
"What about the Aeon slug?"
Ghost Ears asked, giving the extremely tired Vivi a friendly look. Vivi had flattened his body and currently resembled a patch of dirt. "Employee," Ben said. "Underling and minion." In response, Vivi telekinetically threw a rock at Ben, which he dodged.
"Ben, I don't trust this guy," Vivi said. "He's weird for a fairy. Hey!"
The slug suddenly brightened up, his coloring changing back to normal.
"I know. Ben, give him the job interview," Vivi said with all the vindictiveness of someone who'd just gone through an interview. "Here, let me interview him. What's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you?"
"Viv, that's not how the questions work," Ben started to explain, but much to his surprise, Ghost Ears started talking.
"Well, the most embarrassing thing? Hard to choose just one thing, really.
Once, when I was on waist duty, standing there waiting for my flight bag to get loaded up, another fairy on duty with me took off. He got, not very far, and then his shoulder strap broke."
Ben winced, and Ghost Ears laughed.
"Well, you can guess what happened. The worst part was how I'd been bragging about our leather workers all week, and how many people saw it. Oh, I can still hear them laughing. Well, after that, I had a roof built and implemented a policy of one at a time, and no standing around the takeoff area. No one else needed to get covered in fairy shit."
Ben nodded his head, and Vivi looked at Ghost Ears in shock.
"Well,"
Vivi said, feeling that something was very different about this interview.
tell me something bad about yourself."
"Vivi, that's a terrible interview question," Ben said. And once again, Ghost Ears answered the question.
"I'm extremely selfish. I want to be in a position of power and influence because I enjoy it, not because I think I'm the best person for the job. Originally, I set up Strangetown to be entirely run by me, just like it was a village and I was its chief. It worked. Okay. But soon enough, other people started having better ideas than me, and I had a choice. Either shut them down or give them a chance. So I divided up the power of my position into pieces, and instead of one chief, we had 7. It was so hard," Ghost Ears said, laughing. "But it was for the best."
"Ben, what's happening?"
Vivi asked, frowning with his big spherical eyes, his voice thick with insecurity.
"Why isn't he falling to pieces? He's in the middle of a job interview."
Vivi whispered the word the way a squeamish member of the Spanish Inquisition might whisper the rack. "Because he's highly employable," Ben said, eyeing the fairy with new eyes. "Okay, Vivi, let's try a classic question," Ben said, and Vivi zoomed over to his side, clearly ready to see someone else get absolutely destroyed in an interview. Then they heard a noise from deep in the woods. Not a growl, not a scream, not a hiss, not a burble, whisper, or crack of branches. The trees did not shake, the ground did not quake, nor did a strange, unknown beast roar. But a song. Deep in the dark woods sung with voices pure and strong. It was an eerie alien music from beyond this world, from beyond the universe, beyond everything. Ben felt there was something in the air, and none in his party could do anything but breathe and listen. It was electric, like magic on his skin and making his hair stand up on end. It built higher, deeper, denser, making Ben feel alive and powerful. He felt it in his mana pool, the liquid becoming thicker and more potent.
"We need to get out of here,"
Vivi whispered. And for the first time, Ben saw true fear in the Aeon Slug's eyes.
"The mana density in this area just tripled, quintupled. Slime," he swore. "It's as thick as the 2nd layer!"
Vivi exclaimed that last part, but still in a strained whisper. His skin was glowing, the brown melting away to reveal a bright, green, glowing body.
"Did you just say the 2nd layer?"
Ghost Ears said, his fair face going pale. Then, mixed in with the singing, began the growls, the hisses, the burbles, the shrieking laughter, the screams, the shaking of the ground, and the roars of strange, unknown beasts. The trees shook and the ground began to rumble around them. "Oh no," Vivi said, his eye stalks entirely erect, stiff with alarm. "No, no, no, no!" "What?" Ben shouted, his nope sense screaming at him, all of his vaunted human glands opening up and operating at full capacity.
"There's too much mana!"
Vivi cried.
"Run! Run! A passage to the underground is opening!"
Chapter 6. Ben had thought the mana density had been great before, but it was nothing compared to the levels he felt now. The ground heaved, and he heard a sound like a gigantic cannon going off. There was a great rush of air, a sucking that snapped enormous tree branches and shredded the canopy in the area. Ben, Vivi, and Ghost Ears were lucky to have survived it. The great vacuum effect only lasted a moment, but it drew them through the air like it had become the central gravity point of the entire world for that brief time. "Regroup around Short Boss!" Ben shouted, and the party, to their credit, obeyed. Ben tried to help Ghost Ears move faster by creating a flight ring around him, but only succeeded in making the true elf fairy dodge around the suspicious ring. Ben got an ominous feeling, hearing something impact the canopy above them and feeling heavy particles rain down. Far ahead of them, thankfully far ahead of where Short Bus was trying to stand up, the ceiling of the over-cavern forest broke, torn to shreds by an enormous plug of dirt and stone. It ripped through the forest like a bullet, devastating the environment before coming to a halt. Through it all, the sounds of the singing and of the unknown monsters had never stopped. They had been overpowered, certainly, but they had not stopped. The sound of the destruction was from them, not against them, after all. They made it to Short Bus. The gigantic shark had a strained smile, and he was covered in a layer of thick, almost slimy sweat. His stomach was clenched, and so was his jaw. "Vivi, what's going on?" Ben asked the moment they were all together. Vivi was rapidly shifting through colors, each of them a bright, vibrant neon. Ben slapped the Aeon slug upside the head. "Knock that shit off! You're practically a beacon saying, 'Come over here!'" Vivi moaned, his eyes darting about wildly, completely useless. Ben shook his head, then turned to Short Bus, who was groaning and trying to find the willpower to engage in a life or death of self and family fight. No help there. "Ghost Ears," Ben said, and the fairy sharpened to attention. "If I've been in the world for a full week, I'd be surprised. What the fuck is going on? Tell me quickly." Ghost Ears had never been ordered around like that before. He was always the one in charge. He was always the one barking orders. Yet he found himself answering smartly. "Your Highness," he began. "Cut that shit out! No time! Answer now!"
"The mana density in this area has spiked for an unknown reason, and as a result of the pressure differences, a passage to the underground layers is formed."
"I'm going to ignore that because it doesn't make any sense," Ben growled, feeling his crown start to grow hot, feeling the effect of a new, unknown skill take hold in him.
"You don't know about mana dynamics?"
Ghost Ears said, and Ben glared at him, gaining another skill in the process. "There is no magic on my world. I need the important details," Ben said through gritted teeth, equipping his damaged short sword via his utility pocket and immediately using Royal Antique Repair, left hand, on it. And more of the damage flaked away. The metal began to shine, and a real edge formed.
"A passage to the underground is opened. The underground is absolutely infested with powerful and dangerous monsters. These monsters normally are unable to leave the underground because the mana density of the higher layers is too thin to support them for long. However, when a passage opens, the mana density of the underground floods out and allows these creatures to roam the surface around the opening. Given enough time, they will expand this dense mana zone and spread."
Ben nodded at Ghost Ears. "Thank you," he said, then said in an explosive whisper under his breath, "Fuck!" Vivi had been listening in on the conversation, clinging to it for all he was worth to keep from being swept away by his raging emotions.
"Your world didn't have any magic?"
he asked, because it was the only thing he could cling to, the only thing his very powerful mind could grab hold of in the stressful situation. "Not a bit," Ben said. "You need me to carry you, Vive? Because you aren't getting left behind, and neither is Short Bus." The sounds were spreading around now, and it was obvious that fights were breaking out between the monsters. Close, way, way too close, they heard something walking across the ground. They froze and saw something moving through the woods. It was glowing with heavenly light. It had a thick, long body, and 4 legs capped with literal golden hooves. Its fur was the purest white any of them would ever see, and it had golden splotches across it. It was a cow. Ben realized that when he saw the splotches, which looked exactly like what one might see on a dairy cow. The magnificent creature walked calmly, regally, through the chaotic forest. Floating around its neck was a sheer, thin, beautiful, transparent strip of pink fabric that flowed and waved as though underwater. It had magnificent curved horns on its head, also solid gold, and beautiful, wise eyes. Vivi said, looking at Ghost Ears, then at Ben. "Wow. So that's a monster from the underground?" Ben asked, marveling at the magnificent creature. It radiated a sense of celestial power and peace, like it had just walked right out of heaven to search for some greener grass in the terrestrial realms below it. "Lord Vivi?" Ghost Ears asked, gulping and throwing the ball into the Aeon Slug's court. Well, Vivi said, trembling a bit, clearing his throat. "Not all the monsters of the underground are documented, of course, and I only studied several volumes of the Monsternomicon and the Codex Panzerax, as well as the unofficial bestiary." "Vivi!" Ben said, cutting off the slug because he was begging to be cut off, because he needed it. "Is that from the underground, yes or no?" "No," Vivi said, watching the utterly out-of-place creature walk through the chaos as though it were impossible for it to be harmed. "Good, we're hitching a ride. Short Bus, can you walk?" "Walk? Yes," Short Bus said, standing up and groaning, doubling over and then straightening out with obvious agony. "Come on, let's see if we can get close to this thing." "Ben!" Vivi said, alarmed but following along. "That's really reckless!" "Got a better idea? I doubt we're going to find something more friendly, Vivi. Besides, I get a good feeling about that guy." They raced towards the cow, then slowed down when they got close. The bovine creature radiated a sense of purity and calm that refreshed Ben, and made the rest of the party aware of how dirty they really were. They would have turned away, run away, really, but the cow calmly turned its head and caught them all in its gaze. It snorted softly, and the feeling vanished. "What a strange world," she said, and her voice was high, beautiful, and pure. "Hello," Ben said, flying closer to her head, but not close enough to touch. "Do you mind if we walk with you?" "For as long as I am able to walk," she replied. Her voice gentle with a hint of... It wasn't sarcasm or bitterness as a human would know it. "Oh, well, thank you," Ben said, then motioned for the rest of the party to get closer. "I would warn the other 3 to not get as close as you," she said, eyes twinkling. "They might not find it as comfortable as you do." "Stay back, guys!" Ben shouted, with his tiny voice, and they heard him, keeping at a reasonable distance. Except Short Bus. He kept glancing over, squinting as though it were too bright, looking away, then edging his way closer and repeating the process. "Do you have a name?" Ben asked, noticing something. He shook his head. There was something in the trees that was made entirely of arms, hundreds of arms, but it scurried away from the group, away from the light.
No, little lord, I've just arrived. A name? What would you call me?
Betsy, Ben said, once again marveling at his ability to immediately name pretty much anything.
I'll wear it well for as long as I can,
Betsy said, still walking her slow, casual walk. You keep saying stuff like that, Ben said. What's going on? Betsy snorted in the way cows snort, gently blowing out air through her big nose.
I'm no unicorn, able to run from place to place to the fleeting islands of innocence and purity across all space and time. I must content myself with where I am. I'm slow but strong. The unicorn and I are from the same home, the pure lands deep in the beyond. You're lucky you never got farther with a girl than you did,
Betsy said, eyes twinkling with merriment. Ben realized the implication, and a blush rose on his face. Yes, he said, determined to retain some dignity. In light of the current situation, it was rather fortunate.
It's rather good you were around. It gives me a bit more time to enjoy the show,
she said, looking around with obvious wonder.
I never quite thought it would be like this.
Thought what would be like this?
Reality. Existence. Consciousness. Being and existing. I was opposed to it, but it's not nearly as bad as I thought. It's all so stable.
Short Bus had crossed the distance half over again, his eyes almost completely shut.
I would ask a favor of you, as one trapped being to another,
Betsy said, looking at Ben, who nodded. Anything. Ben meant it, too. Deep in his soul, he knew he would do anything she asked.
I will walk for as long as my strength allows me, but even now I feel the heat of my purity being wicked away into the void. The holy energy upon you is likely what pulled me here, yet it is not enough to keep me alive. I will die soon. That is an absolute. Death is inevitable. Yet I am not abandoned, not completely, because you are here. Please, honor my body when I die. Transform me into new possibility, into a new future, into rich uncertainty. Weave me into time in line with my nature, that I might be born once again in the beyond.
I'll do my best, but how?
The oldest way, she said gently. The kindest way. My skin, my bones, my body. Turn my skin to clothes, my bones to tools, and my body to strength.
Somehow Ben was able to understand. Eat you? Ben asked, feeling a sense of horror at the desecration.
As you've said. I'd rather it be you and yours than the ugly, bitter, corrupt things that ripped me from my home. My body will not rot when I die. It will lay there, and eventually the beings called gremlins will find me and do it if you do not. Then I will be reborn in the beyond as a twisted, ugly thing, as a future of ruin rather than one of hope. I can think of no worse fate, can you?
I suppose not, Ben said. Short Bus was close enough to reach out a hand and touch Betsy. He was breathing hard, his eyes were shut tight, and his face was one of total longing. His arm was extended out, not even half a foot away from her. Please, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Oh, please, even if it kills me, please let me touch you just once. I'm so sorry, he begged, completely unable to control himself. Betsy looked at Ben, making eye contact for a long moment. An eternal moment.
Lord of the Beyond, grant me my wish,
she said. Her voice an echo of the sound of what could be called heaven, praying. Then so gently sidestepped and leaned into Short Bus's outstretched hand. He groaned, falling to his knees, his hand placed so softly against the heavenly animal. Her eyes shut, and she laid down. Her breathing stopped, struck dead by the touch. Short Bus opened his eyes, which shone for just a moment a brilliant celestial gold. The light faded, and the shark wept, and tears ran down his face. Vivi and Ghost Ears came over, both of them with shame in their eyes, both of them having seen and understood. Without a word, Ben opened an enormous utility pocket and stored the body away, heedless of the mana cost or the space it cost him. He wouldn't be able to put much else in there, not much at all. The light that had kept them safe for their long walk faded from the world. The sounds of monsters returned to their ears, distant but getting closer. The reprieve had ended. "Oh, I killed her," Short Bus said, his voice racked with a complete and total grief. Oh no, I killed her!" "That's how she wanted to go, man," Ben said. "She wanted you to do it and not something else. Come on! Get up! Make it worth it! We've got to get out of here, alive!" "Slime," Vivi said, watching the scene with angry eyes. "Did she say gremlins pulled her from the beyond?" "Ben, this is a serious problem. That's what's responsible for all this, for the passage, for the mana, everything. The gremlins have a way to... slime and salt!" "What's the big deal?" Ben asked, and Ghost Ears gave him a look. The big deal?" Vivi asked. "Ben, they're summoning!" Ben gave Vivi a blank look. "Summoning! Actual, no-joke, full-blown summoning! No, worse than that, they're pulling through entire beings from the beyond at random without any safety mechanisms, without any controls. Nameless summoning! Slime and salt! Ben, everybody is in grave danger!" Vivi was breathing hard. He drew himself up as he came to a decision. "This is bigger than me, than us, and I have a responsibility." He pulled himself up further, his eyes pointed straight up and stiff. He steeled his voice, and for the first time, Ben saw Vivi as the other races of the world saw Aeon slugs, dignified, powerful, wise. "Prince Ben, we have not known each other long, and I deeply regret the circumstances we find ourselves in. However, as a member of the signatory races, as an Aeon slug, as one who has studied and sinned against the ignoble art of summoning, and as a person, I must put a stop to this, even should it cost me my life. But I cannot do it as I am by myself. By the authority and power granted by the system, I am issuing you the quest immediately, and you are bound to it whether you will it or not." The air, already charged with mana, grew electric. "I will act as your guide, as your mentor, until the day you die. The same day I will die as well. We are bound together now. My lifespan is yours, and yours is mine. My power is yours, and yours is mine. You are bound in service for a single task to me, and I, in turn, am bound as your servant upon its completion." "Vivi!" Ben shouted. feeling the weight of what was happening, concerned not for himself but for his new friend.
Your task, your quest is thus: end the threat of these summoning gremlins, and eradicate the elder gremlins who make up their cabal. For this burden you are granted the special class of Questor, which will empower you in proportion to the difficulty of this task, and empower all who bind themselves to this quest. Should you fail, should you run, you will die. I am so sorry it has to be like this, Ben, but it must. All of the world, and indeed the universe beyond it, is in mortal peril, and without this power we will fail. The beyond is not to be carelessly breached.
When Vivi issued his proclamation, a wave of something powerful and hot spilled forth, settling on Ben's skin and seeping into his muscles, his blood, his bones, and settling into his nerves.
I pledge myself to the quest,
Ghost Ears said, falling to his knees, speaking with a voice that was both hoarse and full of conviction. He began to glow with power.
I pledge myself as well,
Short Bus said, his voice raw with grief and outrage. He began to glow as well. Ben felt something burning in his soul, a connection formed that could never be broken, a bond that would transcend all other things. All their lives were bound as one now. If one would die, all the others would follow. Their powers were bound as one. They were a single being, a brotherhood.
I pledge myself to this task,
an unknown voice called out from the woods, her voice female and dark. Ben felt another connection form, binding him and his party with this stranger, welding them together whether he willed it or not. The stranger walked in a sinuous way, swaying her narrow hips, conveying sheer femininity wrapped over a lethal predator. Her breasts were small and her body completely naked. Her skin was light green and her lips were black. Where eyes should be was only smooth, blank skin, crowned by black eyebrows. No hair was on her head. Instead, antlers rose up into the air, forming a cage around electric purple clouds. The clouds contained eyes. No, they were eyes. Purple sclera with a yellow iris and black pupil. Arcs of electricity ran inside of them throughout like thunderheads, but no sound came from the energy. The clouds shifted and churned, but retained the rough shape of a sphere. The eyes were open and almost mocking, containing sarcasm and anger, but not directed at them, just at everything else in existence. Ben felt himself immediately become aroused, and for the first time since he got his skill, realized fully that he was completely and totally naked. His attraction was utterly obvious to anyone who bothered to look at him, like a man standing at attention. He wished he had some pants. Quite badly. Ghost Ears looked at the new female, then at Ben, then at Vivi, then at Short Bus. He sighed and started to unbutton his clothes.
If none of you are going to put on any clothes, I'm not going to be the odd man out.
Chapter 7. Amid the darkness and the chaos, the monsters and the menace, a man started laughing. Ben couldn't help it. It started with Betsy, that sassy, willful cow he'd known all of 15 minutes before she died. It built when the strange, antlered, naked woman had barged into his sacred Lord of the Rings-style moment. The absurdity grew when he looked down and saw he'd popped a boner. That alone wasn't enough. Then Ghost Ears had started taking off all his clothes, and Ben honestly believed the serious fairy was completely sincere in his belief that he was supposed to be naked like everyone else. It was just too much.
Ben laughed and felt a warmth in his chest, a great fire in his heart that somehow he knew that everything was going to be all right. It was based on exactly nothing, yet still he knew. Post-logic, a space elf might say. He laughed and laughed, unable to take any of it seriously anymore. The feeling of warmth, of pure, unadulterated morale, of unearned confidence, of determination filled his soul. Vivi looked affronted. Shortbus looked up, looked around, and saw it. He started guffawing. He was laughing even harder than Ben, his extremely loud voice echoing out in the forest. Ghost Ears paused in the middle of pulling his pants down, looked up, and turned crimson red before he started laughing as well. Vivi tried. He tried so extremely hard not to, but he chuckled and relaxed. The sound of the Aeon slug laughing was something akin to a squeaky toy, like the kind a dog would squeeze for hours. It was high-pitched, but clearly laughter, and the sound of it made the rest of the males completely lose their shit. Tears were falling down faces. It was glorious. The best part was Vivi didn't feel like they were laughing at him, and started laughing even harder. The woman, with her green skin, antlers, and enormous magical eyes, froze on the spot. Her mouth was slightly open, like she'd been prepared to say something, to take control of the situation more than she already had. She'd been ready for anything but this. "Well, come on, then," Ben said, as he waved her over to the group, thankfully his erection gone. "We're glad to have you for as long as we've got left." She stood awkwardly, the dark name she'd given herself dying inside of her, banished like a shadow from the sunlight. The laughter of the party had not gone unnoticed. Too many of the dark and ugly things summoned from the worst parts of the beyond. It was poison and caused them to flee. To others, it made them nervous, cautious. To the beasts, the brutes, the unthinking, it was merely more noise in a very loud forest. The elder gremlins, named thus by Betsy, were too high to notice or care, caught up in the ecstasy of chaos. They had pulled so many creatures forth and had no plans on stopping ever. The Pure Lands, the Abyss, the great silent oblivion, even the wrathful heavens, they would pillage them all. They did not care about their lives or about the reality they found themselves in. They had a dream that one day there would be no more days, no more nights, no more sight, no more emotion, that all things would return to the numb, quiet sleep of the void. If it were not so, they would not have become gremlins. They would have become something else. They carried with them dark wisdom and burning intellect. Though they were weak, they were clever in their weakness. Elder gremlins rarely engaged in combat, rarely took risks, happy to sacrifice their ignorant children in their places whenever the chance came up. If it were not so, if they were not selfish to the highest possible degree, if they had an ounce of love for another being inside of them, they would not have been made into gremlins. They would have become a turret snail, or an axe beetle, or a mimic, or any of the other endless variety of monsters found in the world. But they were what was left, the dredges of evil that had been sifted out of vast and incomprehensible beings, things which would never pay a debt when there was someone else left to do it for them. Weak, silly, easy to kill, yet even so the gremlin was one of the most dangerous creatures in the world because it was pure in its intention and had the will to see it through to the end. This was why, when one of the recently spawned lesser gremlins found a bright, brilliant, shining soul gem that had once been in the hands of the Greys of Greyport 3, the system trembled, bound by its own damn rules. Because the chaos they had already unsealed with their knowledge of the beyond and mere sparks and embers, the lowest possible class of soul gems, was nothing compared to what they would do when they obtained a quasar-class soul. The system itself felt the threat and felt the quest be issued. A rarity, for the cost to the one who issued it was great. After all, it could only be issued once, and once issued, they were bound to it until it was done. The system's full attention was focused on the small party, naked, barely armed, unfamiliar with one another's full abilities. One of them still had food poisoning, and they had neither shoes nor a single wish at their disposal. Yet they laughed, and the system was reminded of his love of humanity. They were weak, stupid, ignorant, easy to kill, reckless, and illogical, pretty much terrible at everything they attempted from his perspective, but by the void did they know how to die beautifully. They feared it till it came. Then they did not care. He'd seen it play out endlessly, from their beginnings in the war, through the time they were betrayed and cast into his custody, through the time they were betrayed once again when they broke free, and through their endless quarantine and imprisonment on a single planet in a quiet, dead galaxy. The other races simply did not understand that humanity was no threat at all unless they were backed into a corner. They were terrible and frightening to look on, but all they wanted to do was find a monster and scream in its face. Tell it that it wasn't allowed in their reality, and that it should kindly remove itself or they would do it for them. That, and get really, really drunk with gigantic Tier 1 artificial intelligences and convince them that they'd be happier if they had beards and a Scottish accent. Also, if they turned themselves into gigantic world ships, hosted humanity, and catered to their whims. That would be really awesome. The system watched, and with him, the progenitor of humanity watched as well, with interest, their endless haggling about the details of his incarnation put on a momentary pause to watch.
Look at how they're laughing. It just completely disarmed that Chaos Warden,
the Inevitable said with a quiet smile. They're doomed. I can't believe I overlooked this. Why are there mushrooms that give visions of the beyond on your planet? The system said, and the Inevitable shrugged.
Why wouldn't there be? You're right, though. The gremlins are doomed, the Inevitable said.
I disagree, the system said.
Want to make a bet?
The Inevitable said, something like a twinkle of amusement in his eyes. I don't gamble, the system said.
You're just sore from last time. Come on. Low stakes.
Just for fun. I'm about to have my first major breach since the Primordial War. This isn't the time for a silly wager.
Well, I bet. One small favor owed from you to me, or whoever I like. That they recover the Quasar Soul Gem and defeat the Elder Gremlins.
Just a small favor, the system said, looking over at the Inevitable. Nothing outrageous.
No. And if they don't, I'll go into your service for 10,000 years? That's a short little jaunt, and you'll need the help if they don't pull it off.
That's a horribly lopsided wager. I'm practically guaranteed to win. No deal. I don't gamble, especially with you. I can't interfere, or allow anyone to interfere. That's what it means to be impartial, and that's what it means to follow the rules. The system sighed. Somebody, at least one person, has to follow the rules. Ghost Ears no longer had any clue what was going on, but he was wearing all of his clothes, which made him an oddity in the party. He felt that perhaps somewhere along the way he might have made a mistake. Those old fairies who told him off, who told him he'd die and doom others to death, they were old, which meant they'd at least survived long enough to have a valid opinion on how to survive as long as they had. They'd told him to be content with his good looks, and to screw every beautiful fairy in his village, then go and screw all the beauties in the surrounding villages as well. They'd told him his rare race was all the contribution he needed to give their species, and to be content with his good fortune. When Strangetown had collapsed, what Ghost Ears dreaded the most, aside from everything else, was facing those old fairies once again. He felt that he was willing to do anything for just another chance, anything, to succeed and avoid the "I told you so." As it turned out, anything was a very broad, strange price to pay, and involved being surrounded by intelligent beings who walked around naked like it was normal. It also involved the beyond, and passages to the underground opening up around him. Ghost Ears felt that he had descended into a kind of hell, that he was condemned for his wish to be more than he was, for not being content with his lot. Yet he was laughing. Prince Ben had a plan. He'd accepted the burden of being a questor, had sworn to vanquish the evil which shamelessly violated sacred places. And once the evil was defeated, they would rebuild Strangetown, and this time succeed. Under such a leader, he felt invincible. Ben continued laughing, knowing with absolute certainty that they were all about to die. They might go down swinging and smiling, but they were going to go down. He was no fool. Ben flew over to the girl with the antlers, aware of his own nakedness and balancing it out with an awareness of his size. She had frozen on the spot, likely suffering a case of immediate regret at forming a permanent soul bond with a group of strange, naked men in the woods. She hadn't moved since Ben had called her over, so he flew right in front of her face and did his best not to gulp. At that exact moment, the reality of how small he was really kicked in, because his entire body was about as tall as her head, not counting the antlers. It was like talking to someone the size of a tree. His entire field of vision was dominated by her enormous features, and looking up and seeing the antlers with the glowing purple thundercloud eyes above him was, frankly, terrifying. "Hey!" Ben said, willing humor and energy into his voice. "What's going on? Come on, snap out of it! We're surrounded by monsters!" Ben snapped his fingers in her face a few times. Her body did not move, but above him, spaced out so far, he could only just barely focus on both of them at once. Her eyes moved. The yellow irises shifted smoothly from staring straight forward to crossing slightly and looking down directly at him. The cloud eyes shifted a bit, extending in an almost telescopic way, focusing on him further. "My," Ben said, gulping. "What big eyes you have there, Red Riding Hood!" The eyes underwent a visual phenomena that could be described as the mirage effect, like looking at the edge of a black, fresh asphalt road on a sunny 100-degree day. They gained that same shine, like two orbs of reflective mercury churning. The effect ended, and the irises were no longer a nearly matte yellow. Now they were an eye-searingly vibrant fuchsia. "Red," she said. "Have you named me Red?" Her voice was full and womanly, with a deep quality, on the edge of being hoarse or husky, and contained an edge of vulnerable uncertainty. The voice came from below him, her mouth moving, but Ben kept his gaze fixed on the enormous eyes. "If that's what you got out of that," Ben said, "then I guess it's Red. I don't really know who you are or why you did what you did, but I'm glad to have the help. I'd like us to start moving now, to get somewhere safe and figure out a plan, but I need you to follow my lead. My name is Ben." "Chaos Warden," she said.
You said you didn't know what I was. That's what I am. On this night, the boundaries of chaos encroach even further into the beyond. One of the great foes of discord has been stolen from the front lines. My loss will be felt, Ben. There is only one plan, and I have only one purpose, she said, her voice raw. What's that? Ben asked, feeling the heat of her intensity and finding that it didn't scare him. To destroy the ones who did this, she said, her teeth clenched and her eyes storming with power, and ensure it never happens again. Bolts of magical electricity, lightning really, reached out from her eyes like something one would see from a Tesla coil. Red, you're in the right place, Ben said, then flew away from her and called out to the group. It's all good, guys. Red's a chaos warden and she hates gremlins. Come on, let's get moving.
Good enough for me,
Short Bus shouted, practically begging the monsters in the forest to start the fight. So what? She doesn't have to do a job interview either? Vivi said, his voice an irritated sulk. So why did I have to go through that? Lord Vivi, Ghost Ear said, I will be more than happy to continue the job interview at your convenience, he said with way more respect than most people felt Vivi deserved. The Aeon Slug brightened. Oh, good. I'll prepare some questions. Say, I bet I could interview Red at the same time. That would be fun. Sure, job interviews for everyone, Ben said. I'll even help you write up some questions. Anyone at all? Where is a safe place around here we can get our heads on straight? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Not likely, Short Bus shouted. There's monsters everywhere. Come at me!
He continued, bellowing his defiance in a way too happy about it tone. The shark is correct, Vivi said. We might as well just pick a direction and start running. Ghost ears? Ben asked, hopeful. I'm afraid they're right. I'd like the chance to rest and level as well, but there's no chance of that happening, not in the middle of all this. He waved a hand broadly to encompass their surroundings. Damn, Ben said. Then, to his surprise, a utility pocket opened in front of him, and a determined-looking Frankie dropped out and landed on the ground. He had the celestial pink ribbon Betsy had floating around him, scaled down to fit his size and shape. He pointed at himself with an arm and seemed to be staring Ben down hard, demanding something. Frankie, Ben said slowly. Do you have any ideas? He asked, guessing that was what the elemental being had wanted. He guessed correctly, because Frankie nodded, then bowed his pseudo-head. His body language was full of effort, concentration, focus. The pink ribbon began to fade, like it was being absorbed into Frankie's very being, changing him. For a moment, he appeared to be multidimensional, like a very clearly Frankie-shaped hole in reality leading to a deep and vast space. The mana in the air began to swirl and was siphoned into Frankie like he was gathering it up for some great feat of magic. His size grew, and Vivi gasped. Frankie began to let loose a whistle, like a tea kettle, high-pitched and steady, his body rippling. In front of them, a patch of space began to swirl as though in a vortex. It was like someone had used a smear tool in an image editor. The colors and shapes visible while stretching, then breaking apart to pure blackness. The vortex grew quickly, forming an arch tall enough for even Short Bus to walk through. It stabilized, and the purple, sea anemone-like tendrils that were unique to the utility pocket formed along the edges. They were glowing bright, drawing in the thick ambient mana. Frankie wheezed, like a kettle losing steam, collapsing on wobbly legs. The depth effect ended, and he returned to his usual black spatial distortion. He raised a single limb, and though no little hand formed, Ben knew for a fact
The little guy was giving him the thumbs up. Then a utility pocket opened under him, and Frankie wearily passed through. Ben could sense him in his utility pocket, and he knew he would not be joining them for any fighting, no matter how badly he might want to. He'd already given everything he had. "Well," Ben said, shouting orders, "come on then, let's go." Then Ben, having no idea what Frankie had done, what would happen, or if it was safe, confidently flew to the entrance and breached through to the other side. Frankie has leveled up. Level 4. Skill gained. Blessing of the Pure Lands. Frankie has advanced. He is now a lesser utility pocket elemental. Special ability gained. Pocket of Sanctuary. Level 5. Skill gained. Lesser Mana Siphon. Lesser Mana Furnace. Level 6. Internal storage has increased.